who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, "Oh my God, what's she doing now?"
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Top of the morning to you and welcome to the Camilla Tominey Show. I'm coming here straight from the Grand National yesterday, where I didn't just get #1 but the #2 place horse. So I'm hoping to continue my winning streak with what is going to be a fun-packed show today. We've got loads of great guests. I'm going to be speaking to Greg Hands, who is the Tory party chairman, about the local elections and also this smart motorways announcement, which I think has probably come a little too late, but let's see. Also going to be discussing the NHS and strikes with Wes Streeting, the man who hopes to be the next health secretary. And we're going to be hearing from Sir Rocco Forte, who's chairman of the Rocco Forte Group of Hotels. You'll have heard of him. He was a Tory donor. He gave the Tories £100,000 in 2019, but I think fell out of love with the party because of what happened to Boris Johnson. So we'll find out from him whether he ever plans to donate again, because I don't think he's particularly happy about what the government is doing with businesses and tax. All that and more to come on the show. We're also going to be having a discussion about the coronation, local elections, Harry and Meghan. Bear with us on that one. Let's go through the front pages first of all, though. Sunday Telegraph goes with that main policy drop of the day. Deadly smart motorways scrapped, which I'm sure will be music to your ears. The Sunday Times goes with breast cancer surgeon, 250 deaths under the spotlight. They've done a special investigation on a particular surgeon in that story, not Sturgeon. I've got Nicola Sturgeon and her camper van on the brain, clearly. The Observer, NHS crisis deepens. Oh, I've got it the wrong way up. There we are. This could be a result of my going to the races yesterday. Although being a teetotal, I can assure you I'm not hungover. The Observer, NHS crisis deepens as nurses plan mega strike. I'm going to be speaking to the paper reviewer about that in just a moment. Sunday Mirror, coronation heroes. That's a story, I think, about the idea of the King and Queen's consort trying to make the best, with the Mirror having reported in the week that the coronation plans were in chaos. The Sunday Express, royals on brink of collapse. Good grief. We're going to be discussing that in just a moment because that's a very intriguing splash. The Mail on Sunday, MOS saves the Grand National, and that's about them having exposed the protesters who were planning to storm the racecourse yesterday. And then The Sun on Sunday, I'm a Celeb Horror. This is a story, I believe, about Janice Dickinson falling over. So there you have it. Now, let me introduce my illustrious paper reviewer, former colleague at the Express newspaper group, Sam Lister. She's the Daily Express's political editor. Thanks for joining me this morning, Sam. I know you're a friend of GB News. Absolutely. You're often on doing the papers, and it's delightful to have you here on a Sunday. Let's talk about this policy drop of the day. It's the government now saying they're going to axe these smart motorways. What's your reaction? I'd imagine Express readers, like GB viewers and listeners, think that smart motorways are irretrievably stupid.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a victory for common sense, isn't it? And I think what it is really is this has been governance at its very worst. This was a policy that was dreamt up by very clever people. It was great in theory, but they ignored what was blindingly obvious to the rest of the country, which was obviously this was never going to work. It was always going to be extremely dangerous. I can't tell you, Camilla. I mean, people at the time were absolutely railing against this, and yet the government still went ahead and introduced it. And obviously, it's been in place for well over a decade, and there's different figures around about how many people have actually died as a result of this policy, as many as 50, according to the Telegraph.
I mean, one is too many.
Absolutely.
Anyone could have seen this. You know, there's the lovely picture of the young boy that was killed.
Yeah.
People have lost loved ones.
Yeah.
We had that very moving campaign where people were carrying coffins, I think, through Westminster, saying, you know, smart motorways kill. I've interviewed, I'm sure you have, successive transport secretaries that said, yeah, I don't really like them.
And yet it was still in place. And I think actually Edmund King is quoted in the Sunday Telegraph today.
President of the AA.
President of the AA. He pulls no punches. He says the people involved in this have blood on their hands. He said it was motorway widening on the cheap. And it's a scandal. And I think most people would agree with that. And nobody can really understand why it's taken so long. But Rishi Sunak, actually, to be fair to Rishi Sunak, during his leadership campaign, he did say this was something he wanted to do. Yeah. Obviously, now we're seeing this happen finally. This is. I mean, will it
win him votes? I mean, it's kind of ticking something off the Tory bingo card, because it was something that people were increasingly irate about. We got a lot of letters to the Telegraph about it. Or will people think it's too little, too late, I wonder?
I mean, there is always that danger, isn't there? But I think actually it's just the right thing to do. And I think for the Prime Minister, it's almost irrelevant whether it's a vote winner. It's just the right thing to do. This is dangerous and people are dying and it needs to be stopped. So
I've already interviewed Greg Hands because he came in for a pre-record. We're going to play the interview a little later at 10 o'clock on the show. His answer to the question of what happens to the smart motorways that are already in existence is interesting and one to watch. So
I'll look out for that.
Do stay tuned for that. Now, a royal story of the weekend. This is in your sister paper, the Sunday Express. It's quite the headline, this. Royals on brink of collapse. Why, Sam?
Yeah, well, quite concerning. I'm sure for you, Camilla, obviously you're a keen watcher of royal matters. Yeah. My colleague David Williamson on the Sunday has got hold of this report exclusively from Civitas, a think tank. Yeah. And they've crunched quite a lot of the stats about royal visits over the last decade and found that actually there's been a 40% drop in the number of kind of ribbon-cutting events, royal...
tree plantings, plaque unveilings. It's interesting, I think they've got the stats from Tim Donovan, who kind of does the count-up of all of the jobs at the end of the year. Yeah. Because this is speaking to a kind of change in the royal approach. There's what I would call the Princess Anne approach, which is cram in as many engagements as you can in a day, unveil plaques, open envelopes and all the rest of it. Then there's the more thematic approach that's been adopted by younger royals like the Prince and Princess of Wales and indeed when they were around, Harry and Meghan, that they want to talk about themes but they don't want to go to many visits. But then the punters want to see the royals at the local hospitals and at the playgrounds and at the schools and all the rest of it, don't they?
Of course they do, and I think this is quite a serious problem, and the report by Civitas talks about this potential collapse in support for the royals if they don't get out there and do the hard work, do the hard work, going to wave, going to tree plant. I mean, you know, that you can have an argument about whether that's hard work or not, but that's what people want to see.
Do we think that the younger generation, whisper it, are comparatively a bit lazy? I mean, I think everyone seems quite lazy in royal land compared to the Princess Royal, right? Who's regarded as this trooper who doesn't stop. To be fair, the King's renowned for being a workaholic.
Yeah.
But clearly the younger royals don't want to do it in the same way. I don't know whether what they're doing is as impactful.
Well, I mean, I suppose there is an argument about what has the biggest impact. Is it that bigger kind of picture where obviously you see the younger royals talking about mental health and campaigning on that? Actually, that does have quite a big impact. But if the numbers that have been looked at, if you look at how many visits there have been over the last decade, the King and the Princess Royal are responsible for 2/3 of those. 2/3?
2/3?
Yes.
God, I didn't
between
know
them.
that.
And actually the Princess Royal obviously tops the King because she is the hardest working royal. And actually that is a huge number of visits on two people's shoulders. And the younger royals really need to kind of step up and start taking on some of those responsibilities.
Briefly on that, are Express readers interested in the coronation? There's been some YouGov polling to suggest that there's a bit of disinterest. You know, there haven't been many applications for street parties. They are interested.
Yeah, I mean, clearly our readers are just massive royalists, and there's an insatiable appetite for royal news. And, you know, we've had the royals on the front page for 3 days running this week because there is that demand for the latest updates on the coronation. So, yeah, certainly for our readers, it's a huge event.
Harry's newly announced appearance is going to add a new dimension to the coverage.
They're not fans of Harry, it's fair to say.
I know, but he's the copy gift that keeps on giving,
Indeed.
ironically, so there you have it. Now, the Groundhog Day story, we call it that because it's Sean Linton's piece in the Sunday Times, a bloody battle tearing the nurses' union apart. What's going on there, Sam? Because it's weird, this. I mean,
it's a real mess.
Some nurses want to accept what the government's offered and some don't.
Yeah. At the Express, we've been very closely involved in talking to the Royal College of Nursing throughout this period of industrial action, because actually a lot of our readers were quite sympathetic to the nurses. They knew they'd had a tough time during the pandemic.
Yeah.
They know that they're actually on quite low wages. And so there was quite a lot of sympathy, and actually more widely there was a lot of public sympathy, and it remained rock solid throughout that industrial action. But obviously, when the RCN went into those negotiations with the government, it was 3 weeks of very intense negotiations. Yeah. The boss of the RCN, Pat Cullen, and the Health Secretary, Steve Barclay, they really managed to kind of get through lots of different aspects of working conditions as well as pay. And they came up with a deal that Pat Cullen at the time said she felt was worth putting to their members. Yeah. She recommended it to their members. The members have rejected that. That's a big problem for her.
Yes.
But also what I think is very interesting and what we've kind of looked at on the Express is the fact that actually, when you drill down into the figures, only 3 in 10 nurses opposed the pay deal. 3 in 10 nurses overall because of the turnout. So the turnout was...
Oh, so it's kind of skewed. It skewed the response. But are they saying, well, look, the junior doctors have asked for 35%, so we've been too modest. They obviously started on 19% and were kind of told, no, don't be ridiculous. Maybe they do see that they've got the public sympathy more than junior doctors who are considered to be better off, and indeed perhaps even teachers, because people are still angry about school closures during the pandemic. So what do they think then? Some of these nurses think that they've underplayed their hand.
I think possibly, and always in unions you do get a kind of more hardline faction. But when you think about the low turnout and then how it translates to 3 in 10 nurses, most nurses were either, you know, unconcerned and would just go along with it, or wanted to accept the deal. So I think it's a shame that 3 in 10 nurses have pushed the RCN into taking even more radical action, because the next round of strikes, all the exemptions that were in place before, so protections for cancer care, protections for emergency departments, they've now ditched those. The next round of strikes is going to be much more painful because it will affect emergency care. And I think that's a very sad state for the RCN to be in at this time.
I know, and also I don't think deep down nurses will want to harm patients.
Exactly.
And we've seen some statistics in the week about the effect of the junior doctor strike on excess deaths. Those numbers aren't making for very comfortable reading.
No.
Let's talk about the picture story of the weekend, because of course it is the protesters at the Grand National. Weirdly, where I was, I didn't really see what was going on, because you're not watching the telly and you're not being informed of everything. You're just watching the track and trying to see your horses. Went and saw them in the paddock and then obviously being led out into the field, and it's quite astonishing to watch how the Grand National starts when it eventually did start. But I mean, I don't think there's to be fair, I think people are concerned about racehorses dying in races like the Grand National. A lot's been said about the height of the fences and all the rest of it. Is it cruel? But I don't think they'll sympathise with the way these protesters have tried to raise awareness of this. Do you?
No, and I think the Mail on Sunday, obviously, they'd exposed this plot a couple of weeks ago, so it's amazing, really, that it even got as far as it did yesterday. But I think it's incredibly difficult for the police when you've got a crowd of 65, 70,000 people and 100 or so trying to infiltrate that. It is very difficult to completely keep on top of that. But I think the Mail on Sunday makes the point that they say it's the first step in the victory against you know, these kind of woke protests. I think actually it does demonstrate a real sense of arrogance. 100 people think that their kind of self-righteous indignation is so important that they can ruin an event that 70,000 people want to actually turn up to.
And by the way, people from all walks of life. You know, like I sat next to Jackie Stewart of all people yesterday, but at the same time, you know, it's a working people sport, racing, so it's very demographically diverse, I would suggest. Did you have a flutter?
I didn't.
Oh,
I'm sorry. And congratulations on your win.
Thank you very much. I don't like to talk about it. I've only mentioned it twice already on this show. Sam Lister, thank you very, very much indeed for joining me this morning. Do let us know, actually, on GBViews, if you had a flutter and you won. Let's hear some nice success stories about gambling, because I'm not encouraging gambling, but if you had just put a fiver on each way and you've won something, let us know. Now, Olivia Utley, who I don't know whether she's put any money on the horses or not, our GB News political reporter, is in Gravesend. And I'm wondering, what are the good people of Gravesend thinking this morning about the news events of the week? Olivia, do tell us.
Hello, yes, I'm here in the lovely Marie's Cafe in the centre of Gravesend, and I'll be talking to our brilliant People's panel about what they make of the biggest stories of the week and giving them a chance to ask some questions to your guests, Camilla. But first I'm going to introduce you to Graham, who's the manager of Marie's Cafe here. And Graham, thank you so much for having us. I've just had one of the best teas I've ever had in my life, blueberry pancake, very much recommend. But Graham, how do you feel, how business is going at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, as I say, business has slowed up a little bit recently with the cost of living, you know, electric quadrupling at the moment. But at the same time, we're not going to stand here and wait for somebody to fix it for us. We've just done a refurb so that we can hold more events and things in here, whether it's wellbeing classes, whatever it might be, not only for us, but for the local community as well. So lots still to come from us.
Fantastic, and the refurb is looking wonderful. Thank you again for having us. And now I'm going to introduce you to our wonderful People's panel. We've got Sam here, Teresa and Peter. And Sam, I'll start with you. What do you think are the biggest issues facing Britain this week and at the moment?
I think we've got to go with the small boat crisis. Not a mile from here, a hotel recently has been taken over. There's going to be 70 single young men. And where this hotel is situated, it's possibly a 10-minute walk to 3 primary schools, and we've had the bad actors coming over on the boats. There have been people breaking into others' houses, there have been people leering at young girls, and we've only just committed £500 million to the French to help us. Yet the other day one of their warships asked a ferry to move out the way to escort people into British territorial water. So what's going on?
Absolutely, thank you very much. And Teresa, obviously Rishi Sunak has a pretty full inbox. What do you think should be his top priority?
I think he needs to get to grip with the strikes that are going on at the moment. My parents are both undergoing treatment. My father's got advanced cancer. They both had a number of scans and treatments that have been cancelled, which I think is immoral. He needs to get to grip with the strikes and to start governing the country.
Thank you very much. And what about you, Peter? What do you think should be the government's top priority?
Sorting out the rebel backbenchers, getting Parliament to actually, you know, rule for us. We elect them to rule, not to squabble.
Yeah.
And,
thank you.
Sorry.
I think that's a really interesting point you've raised there, because there's multiple issues there about sort of competence. And obviously we've got Wes Streeting being interviewed by Camilla a bit later. Do you think, Teresa, that Labour offers a better alternative? Is there anything that you'd like to ask Wes Streeting?
I'm not sure that they offer a better alternative, but I would like to know exactly what the plan is. We hear a lot about their plan. We don't know how it's costed, and I'd like to see the detail of that.
Thank you. I'm sure there'll be plenty of viewers who would like to see that too. And Peter, what about you? Is there anything that you'd like to ask Labour? Is there something that they could do to make you want to vote for Labour?
I don't think I would vote for Labour, and I don't believe that the windfall tax, as said, will cover all the cost of the, their proposals. I can't see it somehow.
So there's quite a bit of worry about funding, I'm getting it.
Yes,
yeah. Interesting. And Sam, what about you? Is there anything particularly that you'd like to ask Wes Streeting?
Yeah, I mean, all of Labour have been highly critical of the government's, engage in negotiations over the striking. I'd like to ask, what does Wes think would be a suitable pay rise for these people? And once again, how is he going to fund it? Is he going to look to reform? It's never been better funded, around 10% of our GDP. So what are the answers?
Thank you. And it's interesting because we've got quite a lot of sympathy for the strikers here, but a realisation that this can't go on and that there must be some sort of compromise to be reached. So it'll be really interesting to see how that interview goes. Thank you very much from Gravesend.
Thank you very much for that indeed, Olivia, and we will be putting those questions to Wes Streeting right now because the Shadow Health Secretary joins me. Wes, I hope you can hear me. Now, we've seen this announcement from Labour, 7,500 more doctors. I'm a bit confused because I remember you announcing this last year. You're going to pay for it with the abolishing of the non-dom status, but again, Rachel Reeves has been talking about that for 12 months. So, sorry, what's new about this Labour policy?
Well, I think you busted me, Camilla. It's a pretty shameless attempt to remind people that we've committed to the biggest expansion of NHS staff in history, funded by abolishing the non-dom tax status, because we think that people who make Britain their home should pay their taxes here. And the one thing I will say that's a surprise to me is that I'm still talking about doubling the number of medical school places, because I genuinely expected the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, to nick the policy, because he's previously praised it when he was chair of the Health Select Committee. He hasn't. The government have promised an NHS workforce plan. They haven't delivered one. And it's such a fundamental issue because unless the NHS has the staff it needs, it's going to struggle to treat patients on time. And we're going to end up in this bizarre situation where on one hand we're turning away straight A-grade students from studying medicine at university whilst recruiting people from overseas in greater numbers than we're training our own homegrown staff, which is not fair to other countries around the world. But even more importantly, it's not fair to bright teenagers in Britain who could be promising doctors and medics of the future who are being denied the opportunity.
How much does it cost to train a doctor?
Well, our package costs £1.6 billion in total, which includes doubling the number of medical school places. Medicine is an expensive course. That's why there is a cap on the number of medical school places. We don't think that cap goes far enough, and we use the modelling of the Royal College of Physicians to come up with our package, and it's one that's actually been welcomed by university vice-chancellors, the deans of university medical schools. Just the other day I was at Canterbury Christ Church University down in Medway. They told me they've got the capacity to expand medical school places, but they've not been given the opportunity. I was at Worcester University where they're saying, look, we're training students from overseas, but we can't train our own homegrown students. This is crazy.
Has it been welcomed by the BMA? Because I know the unions are worried about training more doctors because it might actually have the effect of suppressing wages.
I think, to be honest, that doctors and nurses and midwives know from working on understaffed shifts that they need the cavalry to come. They know it takes years to train doctors and nurses. That's why it's even more important to get going now. And similarly, when I've talked about, as Labour is doing today, the fact we've got a postcode lottery in general practice, and that the ability of people to get a GP appointment and to get a face-to-face appointment in particular wildly varies depending on where people live. It's not really the fault of doctors. It is a reflection of the fact there are 2,000 fewer of them, and that the government isn't bringing in that pipeline of new doctors to come in and enter the profession as people retire. There are some appalling stories I've been hearing from people who are losing GPs because they're retiring, and there are no GPs coming in to take over their practices. So we've got to deal with that pipeline of talent. And
I know, but you can't do it without the unions on side.
Conservatives.
You told the Telegraph before Christmas, I'm not afraid to tell the BMA and other unions no. So can we please, because the People's panellists have asked this as well, you're the man who hopes to be the next Health Secretary, what percentage rise would you give to doctors and nurses, Wes?
Well, I'm not going to put a figure on it today in the way that if I were the actual Health Secretary, I wouldn't be negotiating live on air. I would get people around the table because it's a negotiation. And in fact, I was listening to Pat Cullen from the Royal College of Nursing this morning being interviewed. When she was asked, well, what is the figure you would settle on? She's not giving one. And I'm not surprised.
What's a reasonable
because
figure,
that's the
then?
nature of negotiation. You go in and negotiate. The reasonable thing to do is to sit down and negotiate and get to a closer point. And that's the approach I will take as Health Secretary.
What sort of
because
ballpark?
I do recognise
They've asked for 35.
Yeah, and I don't mind saying that a 35% increase overnight is not something we would be able to afford. What I would want to do, as the last Labour government did, would be to get the economy growing, as Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves have set out, so that we can invest in our public services and make sure that people are paid fairly. Because I've talked about recruiting new people into the NHS. We've also got to retain the people we have, and increasingly our pay rates in the NHS and in social care at different bands, different levels, are not competitive with the wider world, including the private sector.
All right.
So we see people walking out of the NHS into retail because they're paying better.
Well, you won't give me a straight answer on the percentage rise you'd like to see. Perhaps you could give me a straight answer on this one. Did Keir Starmer personally sign off those attack ads that have done perhaps some damage to your party?
I don't know at what point he was involved in the sign-off process, but I know that Keir fully supports them. He's been absolutely robust in saying that we are going to go after the Prime Minister for his record of failure. We've done it on crime, we've done it on the economy this week, and in the coming week we're going to do it again on the NHS. I think the Conservatives' record of failure is utterly appalling, and anyone who looks at those ads and feels offended on Rishi Sunak's behalf should be offended on the behalf of victims of crime, who's, like, you know, in rape cases, rapists don't even see the inside of a courtroom, let alone a prison cell. I think the Prime Minister should be held to account.
Hang on a minute here. Hang on a minute. First of all, there's some polling in the Observer today to suggest that Labour voters don't quite like these attack ads and don't think that they've worked. Second of all, Starmer's got some brass neck, hasn't he? He was the DPP in 2012 when Emily Thornberry complained about the fact that he had weakened rape prosecution guidelines. He's then on the Sentencing Council, which agreed that all paedophiles should not be put in prison. So why on earth is Keir Starmer in a position to lecture anyone on being tough on paedophiles and rapists?
Well, I think, to be fair to Keir Starmer, he had a proud record as the nation's leading prosecutor of trying to improve the prosecutions of people who are committing violence against women and girls. That was a priority that he set as Director of Public Prosecutions. But of course, whether we're talking about prosecutors or indeed judges,
why did Emily Thornberry complain about it
of the wider criminal justice system.
What was Emily Thornberry complaining about?
I haven't seen it, but.
Well, she sent a letter accusing the DPP, who was Sir Keir Starmer.
I'm not being difficult.
No, but hang on, Wes, we've got this in black. OK, so Emily. OK, let me explain it then. It's really simple. Emily Thornberry wrote to the DPP, who was Keir Starmer, in 2012 and said, "You're weakening rape prosecution guidelines. Stop doing it." So he wasn't strengthening rape prosecutions, he was weakening them. He was on the Sentencing Council, which agreed that not all paedophiles should be jailed. So he weakened the sentencing of paedophiles. So what on earth is he doing, signing off attack ads? It's hypocritical, isn't it?
No, I think what Keir Starmer is rightly doing is accepting that, as politicians, Parliament and government has a responsibility for making sure we've got an effective criminal justice system that is on the side of victims and brings perpetrators to justice. And after 13 years of failure, it is an abysmal failure where I think 1% of rape cases are prosecuted. That means if you are a rapist in this country, you are not even seeing the inside of a courtroom, let alone the inside of a prison cell. And I don't think it's wrong at all for the Labour Party to be robust in challenging the government.
Talking about victims, finally, Wes, will Labour apologise for introducing smart motorways in 2006?
On smart motorways, you've got to follow the evidence ultimately, and make sure that we've got a system that works in the interests of the safety of the travelling public and passengers.
Was it a mistake?
I think we've been pressing the government on the smart. We've been pressing the government on this. So I'm glad that the government seems to have reached a conclusion on it.
All right, Wes Streeting, thank you very much indeed for joining me this morning. Lots more to come on today's show, including Tory chairman Greg Hands talking about the party's hopes at the next local elections, which are fast approaching, and Rocco Forte, the hotel chain owner and man who gave £100,000 to the Tories at the last election, may be telling me that he's not giving them any more dosh. Do not go anywhere. See you very soon.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel. Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB+ radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories, controversies and issues.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
It's 5 times the opinion, 5 times the debate, and 5 times the fun. The Saturday 5. Saturday nights from 8. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
You could wink at the end. I can't Britain's wink. Listening.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. So I'm having quite a lot of fun this morning. If you enjoyed my Wes Streeting interview, you're going to absolutely love my interview with Tory Party Chairman Greg Hands, which is coming up in just a moment. I'm also going to be speaking to Rocco Forte, who's the hotel chain owner who gave 100 grand to the Tories at the last election and I think is now starting to regret it. I'll ask him why. And after all that, we're also going to be speaking to Robert Jobson, the royal author, about his new book about the King. But first of all, here's the news headlines with Aaron Armstrong.
Very good morning to you. It's 10:05. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB newsroom. New smart motorways are being banned, with the Prime Minister acknowledging concerns over safety and cost. 14 planned projects will no longer go ahead and existing stretches will be made safer. Campaigners are welcoming the move but are demanding the return of hard shoulders to existing smart motorways. The roads make up around 10% of England's motorway network. Animal rights activists are calling for jump racing to be banned after 3 horses died at the Grand National Festival. 118 protesters were arrested for disrupting the event yesterday, with some managing to cross the track, slightly delaying the start of the race. Animal Rising wants to see more stringent safety measures and has warned further action will be taken over the summer to prevent what it describes as the brutal horrors seen at Aintree. Officials, though, have criticised the group as reckless. Labour is promising to double the number of doctors trained every year to 15,000. The party says appointments are currently a postcode lottery, with up to 3 in 4 patients in some parts of England unable to see their GP of choice. Labour's also pledged to guarantee face-to-face appointments for patients who want them if it wins the next general election. At least 56 people have been killed and almost 600 injured after heavy fighting between Sudan's army and paramilitary forces. Battles continued overnight in Khartoum as rival forces vied for control of several key sites, with both sides claiming control of the airport, presidential palace, state TV and army headquarters. Sudan's Air Force launched airstrikes on a paramilitary base near the capital in a bid to reassert control over the country. Tensions have escalated there as political factions negotiate over a proposed transition to civilian rule following a military coup in 2021. Scores of military personnel and militia have also been killed. James Cleverly will use the G7 foreign ministers meeting in Japan to focus on promoting a free and open Indo-Pacific. The Foreign Secretary called the region critical to the UK's economy, security and values. The UK recently joined a major Indo-Pacific trade bloc, its biggest trade deal since leaving the EU. The meeting in Japan is also expected to focus on support for Ukraine and closer security and defence ties to counter China. Thousands of armed forces veterans and NHS workers will get to watch the coronation in front of Buckingham Palace. They will get a special view of key moments on the 6th of May, including the processions, the appearance of the royal family on the famous balcony, and a flypast by the armed forces. 3,800 seats will be available in a grandstand at the Queen Victoria Memorial for public servants as a mark of the nation's profound gratitude. TV online, DAB Plus Radio and on TuneIn 2. This is GB News. But now it's back to Camilla.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. It's lovely to have your company this morning. Now, in just a moment, I'm going to be interviewing Tory Chairman Greg Hands. You're going to be watching that. I did it this morning. He says some very interesting things about the local elections. I'm also going to be speaking to the chairman of Rocco Forte Hotels, Rocco Forte, who was given 100 grand to the Tories, but I think is regretting it because of the fall of Boris Johnson. We're also going to get a preview of next month's local elections, or sorry, it's this month, isn't it? We're in May. This month's local elections with 2 experts, both on the right and the left. And I'm going to be discussing a new biography of King Charles III with its author, Robert Jobson. Now, as I said, the local elections now are approaching imminently. They're on the 4th of May, so what, less than 3 weeks ago away. And so far, the Conservative Party's campaign has been relatively low-key. The media weren't even invited to the party's launch event in Wolverhampton last month, which was a bit odd. The Tory party chairman, Greg Hands, who's the MP for Chelsea and Fulham, is the man in charge of campaigning for the party. And as I said, we did speak a little earlier, before I came on air, and I started off by asking him about the government's plan to scrap the building of smart motorways.
Well, it's been right to have a look at the evidence. You're right, there's been a lot of public concern, and that is why we've taken the decision to stop new smart motorways. That's the right thing
the
for us to do.
government's dragged their feet on it. I mean, there's been considerable concerns raised by the likes of us on the Telegraph, lots of investigations. Anybody with any motoring experience thinks it's ludicrous to remove a hard shoulder from a motorway. So why has it taken this long?
Well, I think it's been right for us to, as I say, look at the evidence, to come about it with bearing in mind all the factors that are involved, and that's why we've taken the decision, as a result of the public concern, to cease new smart motorways. That's what I think is the right decision.
But shouldn't then also the smart motorways that have also already been built be changed, because obviously they're not safe now? If Rishi Sunak's taken this decision, he must be saying that the ones that are already in existence should be scrapped.
No, I think we're going to have, obviously, keep watching the situation and looking at that, but there are no plans to scrap the existing ones. This is actually a decision to stop there being new smart motorways at the moment.
But if new ones aren't safe, why are old ones safe?
Well, that is obviously the situation that we will keep watching. We will be constantly vigilant here on behalf of the public. We totally understand the public concern about that. That is why that we've stopped new smart motorways. But I'm saying that we will keep watching the situation with the existing ones.
But if I was a driver, which I am, I'd be worried now, because Rishi Sunak doesn't think it's safe to proceed with new smart motorways. So I'm therefore going to be worried about driving on smart motorways that already exist. Well, that would be a fair assumption to assume that they're unsafe.
No, I think there's a difference between new proposals and motorways that are already there in place and operating. But as I've said, we will
50 people have died, haven't they?
We will keep watching the situation. We totally understand the concern, and it's quite right, the government puts public safety first above anything else. That is why we stopped doing new smart motorways as a result of that concern, as a result of public safety fears.
OK, let's move on to the local elections. Why have the Conservatives been quite shy about their local election launch? No media were invited. It's all been a little bit hush-hush. Are you worried about these local elections? They're not looking too good for the
We've been
Tories.
anything but shy, Camilla. I've
Well,
actually been up and down the country.
I don't think the media were invited to the Wolverhampton launch on March the 24th.
OK, but yesterday, Rishi Sunak has been up and down the country over the weekend. He's been in Lancashire in particular. I've been up and down the country. I've been across the country as Conservative Party chairman, campaigning from Ramsgate to Hartlepool, from Accrington down to Worcester, in Hertfordshire, in Surrey, in Teesside, in Lancashire, High Peak in Derbyshire, in support of our brilliant councillors and council candidates.
How's it going?
Well, it's going to be a difficult set of elections, obviously. It's the biggest set of elections in the four-year cycle of local elections. These seats were last fought in 2019. When it was a different political situation. Jeremy Corbyn was the leader of the Labour Party. Labour did particularly badly that year. So Labour need to show a lot of progress if they're going to seriously say to the general election next year that they've made progress and are ready for government, which I don't believe that they are.
But there's talk of the Tories losing 1,000 seats. There are 8,000 up for grab across 230 council areas. 1,000 seats would be disastrous, wouldn't it?
Well, that's what the independent academic experts are saying, but I know that our councillors and our council candidates are fighting amazingly hard. As I said, I've been into a lot of these councils. I've been in Cheadle, which is part of Stockport. I've been in High Peak. I've been in Hindburn. I've been in Hartlepool. I've been in Darlington. I've been in Elmbridge. I've been in Thanet. I've been in Hartsmere. I've been up and down the country.
All right,
and
so
our candidates are fighting really hard.
You've clocked up your road miles, so to speak. Not sure what motorways you've travelled on, but we've already covered that topic. You did a piece with Tony Diver, my Telegraph colleague, and people on the doorstep keep on mentioning Boris Johnson. So is he an electoral asset for the Conservatives? Or?
Well, look, I'd love to have be working. Boris Boris is very much part of the Conservative Party.
Has
but
he
equally,
been on the campaign, or is he going to go on the campaign? Are you going to weaponise Boris come the general election, do you think?
Well,
Mr.
I think
Hand?
we'll have to wait and see. But Boris is always welcome to be out campaigning for us as a party. But what I discovered in the last few weeks, campaigning in the local elections, is a real enthusiasm for what Rishi Sunak is doing.
Right.
And respect for the way that he has conducted himself as Prime Minister, getting on with the job, delivering the 5 priorities of halving inflation, restoring growth, reducing debt, cutting hospital waiting lists and stopping the boats.
But
Those
how's
are the
that
5
going?
priorities.
Hang on, I get that, and I think it's all about instant deliverables, isn't it? Having said that, you know, stopping the boats, we haven't had one migrant deported to Rwanda yet. I imagine the boats and the migration issue is coming up time after time on the doorstep. Surely the voters are saying, well, the Conservatives has had 13 years. You haven't stopped the boats. When are you going to stop the boats? Could you give us a deadline on that?
I'm not going to give you a deadline, Camilla, but we're
don't the
working
public need it and
incredibly
want it?
hard on the boats legislation. The laws that will enable us to take tougher action are going through Parliament at the moment. We've done deals, very pragmatic deals with friends and allies like France, Albania, Rwanda themselves, to make sure that we get cooperation going both
But
ways.
people will say you've had more than a decade to sort this
Well,
out.
the boats is okay. I mean, there used to be a decade ago. The issue was coming through the Channel Tunnel. We solved that. We sorted that out. Boats is a more recent phenomenon, and that's why we're sorting it out right now. The legislation going through Parliament, the Rwanda scheme is still being challenged in the courts. We're hoping to win those challenges.
But if you've gone from sort of several hundred in 2019 to 45,000 last year, and I'm not telling you anything you don't know. I speak to MPs all the time. They're angry because their constituents keep on saying, why are all of our hotels full of migrants?
Yeah, well, that's why. But you'd be wrong to say, Camilla, this is something that has been going on for 13 years of Conservative government. It is, as you rightly point out, a more recent phenomenon, and that is why we're putting in place the measures like the laws, like the agreements with France, Albania, Rwanda. We're working really hard on it. We're getting the laws through at the moment, through Parliament. Labour, the SNP, the Lib Dems are all fighting those laws. We're fighting in the courts to get the Rwanda scheme in place.
So when will someone be deported to Rwanda, do you think?
Sorry?
When will someone be deported to Rwanda, do you think?
Well, it's still going through the courts at the moment. We're fighting off those legal challenges.
I mean, this must be quite frustrating for you. You know, I'd imagine that Tory voters like GB viewers and listeners are quite incensed by this issue. They feel that you haven't had a grip on it for a long time. So you know that if you don't stop these boats, you're probably going to lose the next general election, right?
Well, no, I don't agree with that. But we
Really?
are, because we are getting on with putting in place all of the measures that we need. And when it comes to any general election, of course, it's worth remembering that Labour, the Lib Dems and the SNP have fought against us at every available opportunity to stop these new laws.
I know, but the
stop
Conservatives
us taking
promised to
tough
take
action.
back control, and people think there's a lack of control over our borders. And there's a visible lack of control because people keep on arriving by dinghy.
I completely understand that concern.
Yeah.
But that is why we're taking the action that we're doing. Through the boats legislation going through Parliament at the moment, getting the Rwanda scheme being challenged in the courts, you know, we're trying to win those challenges, we're making progress. We're making progress here, Camilla.
But is a lack of grip a problem here? Look at the strikes now as well. You've got the RCN having refused that pay deal. You've got junior doctors still asking for 35%. I think there's the perception that, you know, the country isn't working with lots of people standing on picket lines. Why can't the government get a grip of this issue?
Well, I refute that. The government is very much getting to grips with this situation. Rishi Sunak and the whole cabinet are working flat out.
But they're still on strike, these people. We now hear that the teachers are saying that they'd like to go out on strike with the nurses and the doctors. So, I mean, are we going to have many frontline public sector workers actually in their roles, or are they all going to be continuing to hold protest banners?
But it's worth remembering, for example, if you look at each of those situations, so you look at the NHS, for example, actually the RCN leadership has recommended implicitly acceptance of the offer. It's the RCN members. Other unions are balloting at the moment. Unison, which represents a third of the relevant staff in the Agenda for Change workforce, for whom these pay offers will be out there, has accepted. So actually a lot of unions are accepting the offers, and a very generous offer, Camilla. Actually, it's 4% last year, 5% this year, with one-off lump sum
But they're digging their
payments
heels in,
of
and
at
there
least
seems to be this
£50.
impasse.
There's a
I mean,
lot.
people
That's a
want
good offer.
progress. People want progress, don't they? They want this issue to end. They want strikes to end, and they want the boats to be stopped.
I think the people want progress, but they also want us to be a responsible government, be responsible with taxpayers' money. That's why we can't meet the junior doctors' demand for a 35% pay rise. That would give some junior doctors a £20,000 pay rise. So I find the public, yes, they are concerned about some of the strikes, but equally they want the government to be responsible to all public sector workers and responsible to taxpayers as well.
Now, that was Greg Hands, the party chairman, talking to me earlier about the Conservatives' chances at the next local elections. Now, ahead of the next general election, the chairman of Rocco Forte Hotels gave over... Sorry, let me start that again. At the last general election, I'm getting my elections confused, Rocco Forte, who owns Rocco Forte Hotels, gave 100 grand to the Conservative Party because he was a supporter of Boris Johnson. I'm going to ask him in a minute whether he's still a Conservative supporter. He's previously voted Vote Leave and supported the Brexit campaign. He's donated to that campaign too. And is also known as one of the UK's leading and most influential businessmen. But would he repeat everything that he's done at the next general election? And what does he make of the Conservatives' approach to business? Now, so Rocco Forte joins me now. I'm intrigued by your answers to all of these questions, because you are a renowned Tory supporter and donor, and I know you are particularly unhappy about what the government's done about tax-free shopping. So first of all, tell me about that campaign.
Well, on tax-free shopping, all the other European countries give a rebate on VAT on retail expenditure.
Yes.
In this country, Rishi Sunak changed that as soon as when he became Chancellor. So we do not give a rebate. As a result, a lot of people, tourists who would come to London and the UK, go to Europe instead and spend their retail money there. So not only are we losing out on retail expenditure, we're also losing out on hotels, restaurants and theatres. Global Blue, which is an expert in duty-free shopping, recently did a survey which shows that with American visitors who are the most important in this area, Britain got back to 100% of 2019 level of expenditure, but Spain was 176%, Italy 190%, and France 226%. With the GCC countries, the Middle Eastern world mostly, we were at 64% of 2019. France was at 126%.
So what's going on here? I mean, is this a government-owned goal again on business?
Yes, so they're completely shooting itself in the country in its foot, and it's typical of the short-termism outlook of the Treasury.
So look, I keep on banging on about this 100 grand you gave Boris Johnson. Do you regret giving him that money now?
No, I don't regret giving him that money, because Boris Johnson got Brexit to happen, although not much has happened since.
Well, quite, yeah.
And also won a huge majority in an election, which would have enabled the Conservative Party to do a lot of things it should have done, which it hasn't.
But there was some coverage that I got the impression, I think it was in The Guardian of all places, that you felt quite let down by Johnson. You don't think he delivered on his promises?
Well, I wouldn't believe anything The Guardian says about me. No, I mean, I think actually the way he got rid of was quite disgraceful. I think he lost his way a bit. I mean, I thought he'd get a good team around him to run the country properly. He wasn't able to do that, and you know, he did that in London when he was mayor of London. I thought the same thing would happen now, but we're driven by a sort of Treasury orthodoxy in this country. What Liz Truss wanted to do was completely the right thing, and we've got to get back to an idea of actually creating growth in this country. Labour talks about it, but all it's going to do is increase expenditure and raise taxes further. Raising corporation tax to 25% was one of the most disgraceful things a Conservative government's ever done. It's going to damage the long-term growth of the economy. It's going to prevent people investing in this country. Freezing the tax thresholds was an affront to a tax rise by any other name.
Yeah.
And reducing the threshold for the top rate of tax to $125,000 a year is going to disincentivize the whole of middle management in the UK.
And what if I take
these are not Conservative policies.
OK, so what if I take the contrary sort of Angela Rayner view that, well, you would say that because you're a multi-millionaire businessman and you representing the 1%. You know, should the
it's nothing to do with me. I'm not thinking about myself. But the rich can look after themselves. The rich can go and travel anywhere they want and live anywhere they want in the world. They don't have to stay here and pay taxes. And Labour's idea that abolishing non-dom status, no one's going to leave. People are already leaving with the thought of that happening. It's nothing. I'm thinking about middle management, the people who work in my company, the people who strive hard to earn a living. They're being disincentivized. A lot of the reason why people haven't come back to work is that taxes are too high. And the whole benefit system is skewed to keep people on benefits rather than encourage them to go back to work. The marginal rates of tax are much too high. We have the OBR, which is one of the silliest things George Osborne ever did, been given godlike status. Osborne's idea was that they should keep government honest in its forecasts. But it's effectively driving policy now. It's one of the worst forecasters in this country. Last year, it was third worst in its forecast. It's never made a forecast that's been correct, and still it's driving policy, and it's been talked of as if it's sort of has godlike status. It's completely ridiculous.
So would it be fair to surmise that you're not a great fan of Chancellor Jeremy Hunt? No,
not at all. I mean, everything is being blamed on Liz Truss. The thing that spooked the markets, more or less, was, more than anything else, was the subsidy on energy costs, which then was forecast to be 150 billion. We've continued with subsidising energy costs. It hasn't cost anything like that. It coincided with the Bank of England, maybe on purpose, announcing quantitative tightening on the same day as the mini budget. Obviously she rushed at things. She was taking things much more quietly and much more steadily. But I mean, we had a treasury, one of the most important departments of government, being run from Argentina.
What do you mean by that?
Tom Scholar was in Argentina half the time.
Yeah, I mean, it might have been a misjudgment on Kwasi Kwarteng's behalf to have got rid of Tom Scholar.
Yeah, but I mean, he deserves being sacked for not being on the job all the time.
So are you now regarding the Conservatives as anti-business? I mean, what would you rather? Do you want to see Sir Keir Starmer running the country?
No, but I mean, of course not, because they're going to be even worse. But I mean, what's the point of having a Conservative government which is following policies which have been followed for the last 15 years and haven't delivered good growth? And we've had anemic growth. We're no worse than the rest of Europe, which is basically the same. But we have a sort of social democratic government in power at the moment. We don't have a Conservative government, and there's no one who really believes in driving the economy and changing the system to do that.
Has Reform caught your eye? Have you considered perhaps...
Well, I mean, Reform is a sort of protest party which will take votes from the Conservative Party, and if it's allowed to, will grow to the level the Brexit Party did, and force the Conservatives into a different direction.
But would you consider giving money to Reform?
Well, no, I haven't considered doing that at the moment.
Would you give more money to the Tories?
No, I certainly wouldn't give any money to Tories. They don't stand for anything I believe in, though.
And let's talk about the business community in general, the recovery post-pandemic, Brexit. Some people were surprised that you supported Leave because you're very much a European. You've got a quite strong foreign workforce, not just over in this country, but in your hotels around the world. Some people might have felt that it would be self-defeating for somebody like you to support Brexit.
Yeah, but because I operate in Europe and I see how it works. And I understand it better than anybody here, and the sort of levels of bureaucracy and make ours look relatively gentle. Although of course it's become pretty terrible here. So that's the main reason. And also, I believe that there's a huge democratic deficit in Europe, where the European Union was getting bigger and bigger. You have a number of effectively bureaucrats running Europe. And countries like Italy, where I have a big investment, are sort of hamstrung by what the European Union tells them to do. They can't have an independent economic policy because they're in the euro, and also, of course, because because they're expecting money from the European Union. Unless they do as they're told, they don't get the money.
But it sounds to me like you don't think the government has maximised any Brexit opportunities so far.
But I mean, we've been terribly slow in getting on with things. Obviously, joining the Trans-Pacific Partnership is an important move and will benefit us going forward. All this thing of it's only going to deliver 0.8% growth is a load of nonsense. That's the fastest growing part of the world. The European Union is shrinking as a percentage of world GDP, whereas that part of the world is growing in a big way and should be pushing in that direction.
Final question on the CBI. It's been in the news because Tony Danker's had to step down in disgrace. Should the CBI be scrapped?
I mean, the CBI should have been scrapped a long time ago. And I mean, just because there's some sort of sexual sort of goings on, the Director General is sacked. When the various Director Generals have run terrible policy and taken decisions which are completely wrong, they were allowed to continue. But it's never done, and it's always been a sort of big company manufacturing-orientated entity. It's never done anything for the service industries. It's never done anything in my industry. I won't shed many tears if it disappears.
All right, fair enough. Well, Sir Rocco Forte, I hope you have a very successful summer period in your hotels. Thank you very much for joining me this morning.
Thank you for having me.
Lovely to see you. Now, Olivia Otley and our People's Panel in Gravesend have been lapping up all of the interviews. We've done Wes Streeting, we've done Greg Hands, and now we've spoken to Rocco Forte, who I imagine is speaking the language of the people on the People's Panel. Olivia, what did everyone make of it?
Well, yes, Camilla, we've absolutely been lapping up those 3 interviews, and the People's Panel here have lots of opinions on what we've heard from those politicians there, and Rocco Forte too. So, Sam, I'm going to start with you again. What did you think of those interviews at the beginning there?
Standard politicians' answers, all style and no substance, didn't actually answer the questions we posed. Do these people expect us to vote in blind faith? Words are cheap. And then also, with these attack ad campaigns, I don't want to live in a society that feels it's okay to use things like child abuse, gun crime as political footballs. People are really affected by this in their day-to-day lives, and it's just a cheap shot.
How do you feel it sort of fundamentally impacted your opinion of Keir Starmer and the Labour Party?
Oh, absolutely, 100%. It's disgraceful. You know, these are not willy-nilly subjects. This is serious stuff, and they're quite happy. I mean, they're accusing the Prime Minister of being okay with paedophilia, essentially. In what decent society is that appropriate? It's not.
Thank you very much. That's stark words for Keir Starmer there from Sam. And Theresa, over to you. Did you feel that you asked a really interesting question about funding, which Camilla put to Wes Streeting? Do you feel it was answered properly?
No, it wasn't. He did the usual and just went straight on the attack about what the Conservatives aren't doing. There was no clarity there about how Labour would cost their plans or actually what those plans are. So, yeah, again, you know, no answer.
And what did you make of Greg Hands, the Tory party chairman? He was worried, you know, Camilla was suggesting that he might be worried about what's going to happen in the local elections. How do you think the Tories are going to fare?
I think it's going to be a disaster for them. I don't think they're listening to what people on the street are saying. I don't think they're reflecting what we're worried about. And I don't know where the answer is.
Thank you very much. And Peter, what about you? So you are a Tory party member, but you don't sort of actively leaflet or anything. You're just interested in how the Tory party works. Do you think that the party chairman there gave a good account of himself? Do you have faith in the party this time round?
Yes, I think he was quite businesslike. You know, yes, I fully support what he was saying. I think also, by the way, that Labour are in for a shock. The local elections, I think, will bring... it may not be a landslide, but it'll be certainly way above what people expect.
And do you think that Keir Starmer gave, Wes Streeting gave a good answer there on the strikes? Do you know what Labour's policy is?
It's difficult to know, really. Look, they're in the pockets of the unions, for starters. I don't agree with any of this nonsense. The unions are elected by a small amount of workers within a group.
the Labour Party are elected nationwide and shouldn't be so supportive of the union line, you know. It's just not right.
Thank you very much, and I can see some nodding from Teresa too there. So yeah, that's what our Gravesend panel had to make of it. But for now, back over to you in the studio.
Olivia Utley, as I live and breathe, a great job in Gravesend. The People's Panel speaks so much sense, doesn't it? And I think their reaction to some of the interviews today, I do scratch my head sometimes and just wonder why politicians can't give a straight answer to a straight question. But anyway, we shall persevere on this show every Sunday from 9:30 until perhaps one day we get one. Now, if you want to be on the People's Panel next week, we're going to be in Cambridge. Please do apply at gbnews.uk/panel. Lots more still to come on the show. I'm going to be speaking to Robert Jobson, the royal author, about his book about the King. Probably be discussing a little bit about Harry and Meghan because it's unavoidable, I'm afraid. And very shortly we're going to be discussing the local elections. I'm going to be speaking to somebody on the right and on the left about what both parties' chances are. We might even mention the lesser spotted party of all, the Liberal Democrats. Remember them? We'll see you very, very shortly. Don't go anywhere.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now? Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. Now, on the 4th of May, may the 4th be with you, people across England will be going to the polls for the local elections. Over 8,000 council seats will be up for grabs. And to talk me through what we can expect, I'm joined by Lord Robert Hayward, the Tory peer, former MP and pollster. And I'm also joined by Scarlett Maguire, former communications advisor to Gordon Brown and Tony Blair. A great panel to have. Can I call you wise owls? I think I can. Now, look, I had Greg Hands on earlier. Bless him, Robert. He didn't want to advertise the launch of the party's election campaign. It's all looking a bit dodgy. Are you going to lose 1,000 of these 8,000?
Well, I'm going to look at it as an analyst rather than as a spokesman for the Tory party.
Love that, yep.
But yes, there's no question the Tories are going to lose seats. They've had, through the period of the Conservative government, quite an extraordinary run of local government election successes, so that they actually have more seats now, with the exception of 2019 when they lost seats, but they have more seats now than any governing parties had in decades and decades and decades.
So it's theirs to lose.
They're there to lose, and they are defending more seats than the Labour Party and the Lib Dems put together.
OK, but you mentioned the Lib Dems. I mean, I might have cruelly called them lesser spotted. I know Ed Davey's been, like, you know, on a bulldozer in Berkhamsted and doing these sorts of kind of things. But, Scarlett, they're not necessarily going to come over to Labour, are they? I mean...
No, I mean, I think that we have to remember that, as Robert said, the 2019 elections, which is where we're coming from, the 2019 local elections, were less of a disaster for the Tories. They did actually very well. I mean, were a total disaster because Theresa May went straight afterwards, right? They were so awful. So actually, they're not going to do that badly. Labour isn't going to do that well.
But what's that saying about Labour?
No, because
I'll just say that because it's been a pretty disastrous period for the Tories, right? You know, the Truss era blowing up in the Conservatives' faces, the fall of Boris Johnson, Partygate. You've got to look at Labour and say, well, why aren't they doing better?
No, of course they're going to do. I mean, of course they're going to win. They're probably going to get Swindon. They're going to get Plymouth. They're going to get some thing, but they're not going to wipe the board because actually the Tories were at an all-time low, right?
Okay. That's just not true. The Labour Party in 2019, Scarlett, and you cited 2019 as the case, oppositions win council elections. In 2019, the Labour Party under Jeremy Corbyn actually managed to lose seats.
I know.
The first time that an major opposition party, they should have won hundreds in 2019 and failed to do so. So they're starting, it was the Lib Dems and the Greens and the Independents who did well in 2019.
Look, they're in a
Labour
much
did
better
badly.
position now that Corbyn's nowhere near the ballot paper.
I was going to say, we did have Corbyn as the leader.
Yes.
There was a real problem.
Yes.
And by 2019, whereas in 2017 people thought, oh, maybe he's not that bad, and Theresa May did badly. By 2019, chickens had come home to roost. It was all abominable. But what I'm saying is that this isn't going to be a complete. It isn't going to be Labour gaining. Of course, they're looking to win. They're looking that by the end they'll probably have 100 councils that they're running. But actually, I mean, what's quite important. I mean, what I feel really strongly about these elections is local elections always have low voter turnout.
Yeah.
And what have we got now? We've got these new ID rules, which is going to actually suppress turnout, right? I mean, it is...
Well, but I reckon you're in favour of ID rules. I mean, there's been concerns about fiddling of votes, hasn't there? And people turning up...
There's been one prosecution. This is a problem that isn't there. What we want is we want to encourage people.
But weren't there
to
students
vote.
with polling cards in their university towns and then they were going home and voting twice? And I don't know, that was
they
the
can
suggestion.
still do that.
Robert?
Well, voter ID, the police have failed to investigate. And when I served on a select committee with Labour members and Lib Dem members, one of the complaints that we all made was that police failed to investigate complaints of excess registration and the like. And as for students are the group of the population who are so used to carrying ID cards because when they go to pubs and clubs, late night venues, they have to produce them.
Yes.
And you talk to, Rocco Forte and his colleagues, and they spend Monday morning giving these cards back because the ID's been left.
I mean, to be fair, we could have another debate on another day about ID cards. In general, I mean, how important are the local elections when it comes to the bigger political picture, because you're talking about low turnout. Often people are thinking about their bins and their roads when they're voting locally, and they're thinking completely differently when it comes to who they want to be the next Prime Minister, right?
It's a bit of both, isn't it? I mean, certainly in 2019, what we gathered was two things. Theresa May was unpopular, and so was Jeremy Corbyn.
Yes.
And both of them, well, Theresa May left, and Jeremy Corbyn went on to stunningly lose an election. So actually, they're both a bellwether that if Labour doesn't manage to win quite a few councils, there is a problem. But also on a local level, yes, you think, oh, I'm going to vote for this councillor because I like them, or because they've done something. I mean,
when you say there would be a problem, Scarlett, what do you mean? There's a problem with Keir Starmer. They have to start looking at the top and going, well, why aren't you? You know, you clearly know Blair. It's not happening.
But I think that all the polls show that it's going to be fine, right?
Okay.
I mean, what I'm saying...
Fine, but not good. Robert? I mean...
That's the interesting point. With the Labour Party at, according to the opinion polls, somewhere between 41 and 45% in the polls, they should be achieving what Tony Blair did in 95, 96, in the run-up to 97 election. What we're hearing from Scarlett is preparing the ground that they're going to be nowhere near that sort of figure, and they should be literally wiping the floor with the Tories, and they're not going to. And therefore, the Tories will face questions because they're going to lose a lot of seats, because they lost a lot in 2019, but not as many as expected. But the Labour Party may well have to find explanations as to why they haven't taken the seats that they should do when they're in opposition in these circumstances.
Well, we shall see, right? All I'm saying is we're not going into it saying this is wonderful. But remember the last set of elections, I mean, Labour won Westminster and Wandsworth, which have been Tory forever.
Yes.
I mean, they are getting... But you cannot have, you know, Boris Johnson... whether people think he should have gone or not, I mean, was, by the time the last elections came, a disaster. And then you had Liz Truss, which opened up this ridiculous... I mean, had there been a general election in October, I mean, there would have barely been a Tory seat. So, of course, what's happening is that Rishi Sunak is back, so that we have actually sort of... We're back to grown-up politics, right, where we do have a gap, and quite a big gap, but not an absolutely massive one.
But then
the
opposite view to that, I get that, it's grown-up politics on both sides, but then you're talking about a low voter turnout. Maybe in the more macro picture, people are just a bit meh and fed up of politics, Robert, and both the two different leaders don't look that different, and they're both quite boring, and why should we bother? Sorry to be negative, but that seems to be the thinking in both parties, that you're worried about people being completely apathetic, actually.
There is that risk, and it is a depressing fact that for local government elections, people don't turn out and vote, and tragically, in the vast majority of circumstances, they actually vote according to their national opinion rather than their local opinion, and that's a great shame.
It might be
because they should judge the local councils. There's no question about it. But we are, as Scarlett said, heading into a more balanced, managerial, competent approach to government, and it will be national equivalent vote 2 days after the local elections. Will indicate how the two parties, the big parties,
All right,
have done.
we'll have to leave it there, but we'll get a good indication. Scarlett Maguire and Robert Hayward, thank you very much for joining me. We should say, go out and vote. If you've got one of these elections coming up,
vote.
Do your duty.
No,
now,
absolutely.
Something else that's coming up at 11 on GB News is Arlene Foster, who's in for Michael Portillo. Arlene, I just wanted to say I really enjoyed your interview with Bertie Ahern last week when Chopper was covering my show. That was excellent. What have you got coming up this morning?
Well, of course, we're going to look back on the week that was when Joe Biden visited the island of Ireland, both Northern Ireland very briefly, and then into the Republic of Ireland. We're also going to be looking at Emmanuel Macron and his comments in relation to Taiwan. And then for something a little bit lighter, we're going to be speaking about Mary Quant and the legacy that she has left after her death earlier this week.
Thanks very much for that, Arlene. Really looking forward to it. So Arlene is on at 11 a.m. after this show. Now, don't go anywhere, because in just a minute, I'm going to be speaking to Robert Jobson, royal correspondent extraordinaire. You know, he's known as the godfather of the royal beat. I've actually got another nickname for him, which I'll share with you in just a minute. Don't go anywhere.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Deebs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Hello, I'm Calvin Robinson. Do not miss my Common Sense Crusade Saturdays at 7 p.m. Join me for some in-depth discussions on faith. Is that not the start of the slippery slope? It's very much so. And the big moral questions of the day. I'm baffled.
You've got some nerve.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. Now I'm delighted to be joined by my fellow royal correspondent and friend, Robert Jobson. I said I had my own nickname for him. He's known as the godfather of royal reporting. I like to call you the blues brother of royal reporting because you do have this uncanny resemblance to John Belushi.
I know, just he's dead though, isn't he? But
he is. But
when I left the Express, your old your old paper,
yes,
with Checker Batia, that's what we called the Snooze Brothers.
I love that
front page picture. But then I demanded my own one.
We might not get it right, but at least we get it last. Was often the motto of the paper that we worked on. Don't get it at all. Our King. It's a great book you've written about Charles III, and you've always had a bit of a fascination, I think, with Charles, because you've always got up close and personal. You've written a number of books about him. I mean, this is interesting because we're at the end of quite an interesting royal week, let's be honest, with Harry announcing that he's coming without Meghan. There's quite a lot in the papers today about whether there's going to be this rapprochement, this royal rapprochement. Talk us through your view on it, Rob, because I get the impression that the King might bring Harry in from the cold, but the Prince of Wales, William, is not having any of it.
Well, you know, you're a mum, I'm a dad. We know that we all love our kids equally, and whoever they are, whatever they've done to you, to a limit, I suppose. But he refers to his son Harry as my darling boy all the way through.
Yeah.
And Harry acknowledges that in his book Spare. So, look, I think, yes, he will try to have conversations with Harry. I'm sure he will. And the fact that Meghan's not there, that will probably be more advantageous, shall we say. Not because he doesn't like Meghan, but at least they can speak more freely. As for William, no, I don't think there'd be any rapprochement. And in fact, I write in the book about when they tried to force that Fab Four thing on us during the Queen's death, you know, that sort of fake walkabout when they're supposed to be together, that Kate said to another member of the royal family that it was one of the hardest things she ever had to do. Now, then immediately on Twitter you get all those Sussex troll idiots saying, well, you need to get out more if that's the hardest thing she ever done. You know, but, you know, the point of it is that it was a very difficult thing, particularly what happened as you broke that story over the Charlotte, and particularly what happened with...
the bridesmaid tears.
Yeah, the bridesmaid tears.
Who cried?
And then all that, who cried?
No, I cried at the end of it, I can tell you that.
But, and then you got... But clearly you saw the two brothers. They weren't backing down. There's you know, it's like two stags who just don't want to stop fighting.
But it's not a good look, is it? If, to be fair, there's a degree of magnanimity here. He's going to be put in the cheap seats. He's not going to be able to...
We don't know that
Well,
yet.
OK, I say that
I
metaphorically.
suspect he won't be in the cheap seats.
But he's not going to take part in any procession. He's not going to be on the balcony. He's not going to go to any of the other events.
No, because he's not a working role. But I think he might be in
But does it make William look churlish if he kind of stands in the way of... Clearly, I'm getting the impression from your book that the king would rather be reconciled with Harry. That's the point here.
Well, that's between Harry and the king. I mean, you know, they're old enough to sort that out amongst themselves. It's clear that William's not really happy about it, but William, at the end of the day, is sworn to be a liege man to the king, and if the king wants it, he should just get on with it.
Get on with it and take orders from above.
Just get on with it. Make the king's life as easy as possible. It's going to be a short reign, only because the king will be 75 in November. But you know, and I hope it's at least another 20 years, and it could well be. But the fact is, William will get his time. He'll get his moment in the sun. At this moment in time, he's the heir. Well, act like the heir. Support your father, and if your father wants you to try to build bridges, build bridges.
On the king as an individual, how do you find him? What words would you use to describe him? I think he's a bit misunderstood.
Oh, he's definitely misunderstood. I mean, I remember meeting him. I don't know if you were there. We went round his garden and
the Highgrove tour.
The Highgrove tour, and I thought it was fascinating. I actually went back on a private tour later, and he said, well, and he met me for a cup of tea in the orangery.
Nice.
And he said, what do you think? And I was trying to think of what to say, because it is a bit slightly bonkers, his garden. There are bits of it. And he went, eccentric. And I went, yeah, that's it. Yeah, I'd say he's a little eccentric, but I think he's a visionary. I think he's a pioneer in certain areas of trying to have a sustainable planet. I think he's dutiful, and I also think he's someone who's an honourable and decent man, which again you get people saying, how can he be honourable and decent when what happened with Diana? Well, there were two to tango in that situation, and yes, he did probably reflect upon it, as it says in the book, that before getting married, he probably should have pulled out, and he was still thinking about it, but he was torn between the devil and the deep blue sea, because the newspapers at that time were far more powerful than they are now, and they were just saying, you've got to get married. Kept re-quoting, at 30, you said you're going to get married, and they were, they're making up stories. Actually, there was a story that he said he snuck Diana aboard the royal train before they were married, and then that was denied officially, and then he thought it was Camilla. Actually, wasn't either of those. It was a private secretary's wife who was going to see his wife. And
newspapers in getting it slightly wrong.
Well, they got it slightly wrong, but at the end of the day, that probably led to him being the letter from Philip, the
get
pressure.
On with it. Don't look like a playboy.
Well, it was more like not get on with it. It was like, say, if you are going to marry her.
Do it.
If you're not, don't marry her, so that she's not getting all this her privacy wrecked.
You touched on the planet and this idea that he's now seen as this visionary, whereas before he was rather lampooned for his belief in the talking to the plant stuff. Why isn't he more popular with the youth of today then? Because you'd imagine this eco-warrior, the sort of royal equivalent of Greta Thunberg, would be really popular with the 18s to 24s. There's some research out this week, YouGov have suggested that the young don't really care. They're all moving towards republicanism. Is the royal family in crisis, as the Sunday Express has reported this morning?
Oh, that's what Sunday Express.
Well, the Sunday Express is saying that they're not doing as many engagements as they used to.
Well, as the King said to me when I was in Australia, polls doesn't really pay a lot of attention to them. He's in it for the long term. If we worried about polls, we'd still be in Europe because we were told that Brexit wouldn't happen. So I think polls are piffle most of the time, but they rely on that in the Sunday Express because you're no longer there.
Well,
breaking stories.
That's kind of you. I think we should say that the Sunday Express is still breaking good stories. However...
But they put a poll on the front.
They've put a poll on the front, but it is interesting because it's saying that the royals are moving away from the Princess Anne model. Are the younger ones lazier?
They're certainly not as interested.
Well, that's a problem, Robert, isn't it?
Not for this king, no,
Who do you
for the
think
next
isn't
king.
interested? What are you saying, William and Kate?
I'm saying that the young people are not interested in this king, but why would they be?
Oh, I see.
But it's
Sorry,
not
I
gonna
thought
be
you meant the younger royals weren't interested in the role.
It's not going to be a problem for our king, because he's probably only going to be on
I
for
know,
a
but it
little while.
might be a problem for the Prince and Princess of Wales.
Well, then maybe they need to do a bit more.
Ah, so you're saying they are a bit work-shy?
I'm not saying work shy. They're committed to their family. They have children under the age of 10, and I think they're probably doing for them what is right. But we're losing some of the glamour. Like Harry's decided to do a bunk and go and live in California whilst retaining the title, which should actually be taken away.
Right.
And the Prince and Princess's title has gone to Lilibet and Archie. Technically, they should be allowed to do that. It should be taken away because ultimately, in my opinion, this is just my opinion, is that, you know, if you're going to go and live in a country which is a republic that fought in 1776, the founding fathers weren't trying to... They created a president, not a king.
Yeah.
And why do you have to have titles if you don't want to be royal? And if you want to then attack that very institution that you're taking the titles for.
But on this job thing, finally, it should be a bit more Princess Anne-like. They should be doing more engagements.
Princess Royal is a terrific lady and she's done a brilliant job for many years and we'll always be grateful to her.
Robert, thank you very much. His book, Our King, is out now. Now, I'll be back next week at 9:30 with more punchy political interviews. But up next, covering for Michael Portillo, it's Arlene Foster.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners